Hi, this is Richard Blaine. Thanks for stopping by my Easy Cooking blog again. This blog post and video I'm doing here is the first in a series of videos that I promised in a prior blog post about knife education. I'm going to be doing a series of videos all about knives, all about the major differences in culinary knives and the different kinds of culinary knives and knife maintenance and knife sharpening, very important, knife sharpening. But tonight's introductory video is going to introduce us to the 5 basic culinary knife grinds. Now, many people don't know the difference between the grinds, but there are some subtle differences between Western European knives and Asian knives. And I'm going to briefly discuss what those are, because each type of grind will perform in a different way. I thought I would start with one of my smaller knives. This is my favorite paring knife. I don't know if you can see it, it's rather large. Okay, I'm just kidding with you. It's not a paring knife. It's just my old school French knife. What is unique about this knife is that to many people, this knife looks just like this knife. But that's not quite the case, all right? What's going on with this knife, this is one of the oldest grinds that you'll find. This knife is a V grind. And what I mean by a V grind or a saber grind in a culinary knife is as follows. The knife is ground like a V, okay? You have the spine of your blade, your primary grind that goes from the top of the spine all the way down to your secondary bevel. That secondary bevel that I'm referring to is the nice thin line that you see when the knife gets sharpened. Okay, that's your secondary bevel. So the primary grind, the primary V from the spine down, goes from the top of the spine to the secondary bevel. Okay, the secondary bevel gets sharpened at 50-50, no matter what the angle is, whether it's 30 degrees, 20 degrees, 22.5 degrees. It's going to be the same on this side and this side. So we call that a 50-50 V grind. It's one of the easiest grinds to sharpen. When this side and this side have been sharpened, it will create your primary cutting edge, which is here. Standard V ground knife, one of the oldest ways that a culinary knife has been ground. And it's indicative of many, many brands today. The second knife I'd like to discuss is what's known as a full flat grind. Here again is a French style knife, all right? But this knife, even though this knife to the naked eye looks like this knife, once again, there is a difference. This is a V ground knife. This particular knife is what they call a full flat ground, okay? What a full flat ground is basically a straight arrow. This is how this knife is ground, a full flat grind. You have your spine, you have your primary grind, your full flat on both sides, that go down to your secondary bevel, that fine line that you see when a knife gets sharpened. That's your secondary bevel. Primary grind, both sides, secondary bevel, cut at whatever angle, 30, 20, 22 and a half, it doesn't matter. 50-50 on each side to create your primary cutting edge. Here, your primary cutting edge. Okay, full flat grind, 50-50. Your average grind on a V ground knife like this, okay, and on a flat ground knife like this with an American grind will be 20 degrees, 40 in total. 20, 20 for a total of 40, 20 on each side. That is standard. That is standard on Vs and on many flats. Now again, here's another knife. It's also a full flat grind. Looks just like this knife, which is a full flat grind. But even here, there's some subtle differences. First off, both of these knives are made in Japan. This knife is made in Japan with an American 50-50 bevel, okay, as I stated. 50-50. In other words, 20 degrees, 20 degrees. It's a 50-50 sharpening process, okay? This full flat grind, okay, knife made in Japan is a little bit different. And this is where I find a lot of people make mistakes in sharpening. They will take a knife like this, okay? They will take a knife like this and sharpen it as if it was a 50-50 bevel, and technically in the short run ruin it. Because what this flat ground knife has, is a differential bevel. It's fully flat ground, but the differential bevel is put on the knife to make it work, act, and sharpen like it was a standard Japanese ground knife. And how that works is as follows. Let me show you. This is one of the trickier ways knives are being made today. Here we are. Okay. This full flat ground knife made in Japan actually has an edge, a cutting edge, that works like this knife that's made in Japan. But it's different. This is a chisel ground knife, and I'll go into that in a second. This is a chisel ground. This is a flat ground knife. But the edge, the secondary bevels on this, are cut into the steel to mimic the way this knife cuts. And it works like this. Okay? This is what they call a differential secondary bevel. It's a Japanese knife grind, okay, on a full flat ground knife. You have your spine. You have your primary grind on one side that goes to a secondary bevel. You have a primary grind from the top of the spine to the other secondary bevel. But do you see how these bevels are cut? Okay, this bevel is longer, wider, deeper than this tiny little bevel. Once they're brought to center, they create your primary cutting edge. Okay, this bevel and this bevel recreates this bevel and this bevel, okay, without having to make a chisel ground knife. So what you basically have with this Japanese knife is a micro chisel, okay. It's done one of two ways. It could be done three different ways that I'm aware of, but your basic ways are 90-10 and 80-20 to recreate a Japanese edge style on a full flat ground knife. It's differential sharpening, differential beveling. It's a little more difficult to sharpen, but believe me, I'm going to teach you how to sharpen them in a later video. This is just basic opening information. Differential Japanese grind on a full flat ground knife. Another style of knife you'll find, and is very popular today, this is a standard Yanagiba, or Yanagi, or sashimi knife. Now, technically, this knife is only ground on one side, here, okay? It slopes. It has what they call a high flat. That's where this delineation point comes from. Here's your flat. Here's your primary grind, okay? Here's your back primary grind. This primary grind in the front and this primary grind in the back meet in the center to create the cutting edge of this Yanagiba knife. A lot of people feel that these are difficult to sharpen. They're really not. It just takes a little bit of practice. Some people feel that they are sharper than a knife with a 50-50 V grind. I can debate that. Some people feel that it stays sharper longer. I can definitely debate that because that is not the case, because the angles are different. But this is what is called a chisel grind, and the way this knife grind type looks is as follows. This is a standard Japanese chisel ground knife. This picture is this knife. You have your primary grind in the back. Sometimes that primary grind is flat, and sometimes it's curved a little bit. The ones that are curved a little bit in the back, like this, are the better quality, superior knives. But for all intents and purposes, your primary grind in the back goes from the top of the spine all the way down. Here's your high flat primary grind. Okay, here, from here to here, from the spine to here is your primary high flat. Okay, your front secondary bevel is from here to the point. So from this line down to the end, when these two intersect, it makes your primary cutting edge here. That would be your primary cutting edge. Now once again, this knife can be done in what's known as a zero grind when it's sharpened. In other words, this secondary bevel coming from the high flat to point A, this primary grind in the back straight down to point B to create this hard edge with no secondary bevel. All right, it's in the way you sharpen it. What happens is when it's sharpened correctly, okay, zero grind, it'll come right to the end. You won't see that fine delineation point that you see on a lot of knives. That's called a zero grind. But in many cases, a lot of knives coming out of Japan today will have a differential grind on them as well. 90-10, 80-20. Okay. Standard Japanese chisel. Now, there's something new in the Japanese knife world, and let me explain. Okay. This is a Japanese westernized chisel grind. Now, this knife, this Yanagiba, is a standard Yanagiba, standard sashimi knife, but it's ground in the traditional Japanese way. But for ease of use and sharpening in the American market, what they've done, and you might not be able to see it, is they have added a secondary bevel, a Western style secondary bevel here to make it easy. I don't know if you can see it, but they've added a secondary Western bevel here for ease of sharpening for the American market. So the way this knife looks, because this has that westernized bevel, to the naked eye, many can't tell the difference. This knife has that westernized bevel. So yes, it's a traditional shape, but it's a fairly non-traditional cutting edge grind. And the way it looks on paper is you have your spine, you have your high flat, once again, here. You have your secondary bevel from this delineation point down, okay? But then, if you see right here, they ground another secondary bevel into the secondary bevel, okay? So you have a secondary bevel and then stop, and they ground another secondary bevel, which mimics the standard secondary bevel you see on some of the Western European knives for ease of sharpening. Then you have your primary grind in the back. Okay. This secondary bevel doesn't come to make the point anymore, the primary cutting edge. But this second secondary bevel and the primary grind in the back will meet to create your cutting edge. On this knife, the primary grind in the back is flat, non-curved. So there you have it. There you have it. Your basic kitchen knife grind types available on the market today. Okay. Eventually we're going to get into some sharpening and so forth, but for the sake of education, for the sake of knowledge, I felt you should be exposed to these grind types. We'll get into sharpening and we'll get into angles and so forth in future videos. I hope you enjoyed the information. I hope to see you on the next video. This is Richard Blaine. Thanks for stopping by. Take care.